In 2007, a historian named Timothy Tyson drove to a small town in North Carolina to interview a woman he had been trying to reach for years. Her name was Carolyn Bryant Donham. She was 72 years old. She had been married twice since 1955, had children and grandchildren, had lived quietly in several states under names that changed with each marriage. She had not given a public interview in 52 years. She had not spoken about what happened in her family's grocery store in Money, Mississippi in the summer of 1955. Not once. Not to journalists, not to investigators, not to the documentary filmmakers who had tracked her through the decades. She had simply gone on living, and the world had gone on without her testimony. Tyson sat down with her, and they talked for a long time. At some point, he asked about her testimony from the trial, the testimony she had given under oath in September 1955, in which she described how a 14-year-old boy named Emmett Till had grabbed her hand, grabbed her around the waist, made explicit propositions to her, told her he had been with white women before. She looked at him. "That part's not true," she said. Tyson reached for his recorder. He had not turned it on yet. He wrote the words in his notebook instead, 4 words in ink on paper with no audio to confirm them. 10 years later, he published them in a book. The Department of Justice reopened the case. Investigators went to find her. She denied ever saying it. A grand jury in 2022 declined to indict her. She died in April 2023 at the age of 88 in a care facility in Louisiana without having been charged with anything. 4 words, no tape. And a 14-year-old boy had been dead for 68 years because of what she said the first time. That is where this story begins. Not in 1955. In 2007, in a living room in North Carolina, where an old woman said 4 words to a man with an unstarted recorder, and the words landed in a notebook, and the notebook sat in a drawer for a decade, and the boy in the casket did not come back. Before Emmett Till left Chicago in the summer of 1955, his mother sat him down and told him something. Mamie Till Bradley was a careful woman. She had raised her son alone, worked as a clerk at the Air Force Procurement Office, built a life in the South Side of Chicago that was modest and steady and safe. She knew what Mississippi was. She had people there, her uncle Mose Wright, a sharecropper and part-time preacher who lived outside Money in the Delta. And she knew the distance between the world Emmett had grown up in and the world he was traveling into. She tried to explain it. If you have to get on your knees and bow when a white person goes past, she told him, do it. Whatever they say to you, agree. Whatever they want, give it to them. Don't talk back. Don't look the wrong way. Don't be what they decide to make you. He was 14 years old, and he had grown up in Chicago where the rules were different, not absent, not fair, but different. He had a wide smile and a confident way of carrying himself, and a small stutter that sometimes made him whistle through his teeth to slow the words down. He told his mother he understood. He got on the train. The Mississippi Delta in August 1955 is a particular kind of place. The heat arrives before June and does not leave until October. And in between it presses down on the flat cotton country with a weight that is almost physical. The kind of heat that slows. Everything makes the air visible, makes the distance between towns feel longer than the map suggests. Money was not much of a town even by Delta standards. A cotton gin, a post office, 3 stores, a few hundred people, most of them black sharecroppers whose families had worked those fields for generations, for wages that never quite got them out from under what they owed the landowners at the end of each season. Bryant's grocery and meat market was one of the 3 stores. Roy Bryant and his wife Carolyn ran it, sold bread and crackers and soda and tobacco, and the small necessities of people who didn't have much money and lived far from anywhere larger. Roy Bryant was 24 years old, a veteran, a man who wore his authority the way men in that part of Mississippi wore it, as something that did not need to be announced because it had never been questioned. Carolyn was 21. She had won beauty contests. She worked the store when Roy was away on a trucking run. This is the world Emmett Till arrived in on August 21st, 1955. He had been in it before visiting relatives, but he had been younger then, and younger in Mississippi is different. 14 is old enough to be noticed, old enough for the rules to apply in full. He had 4 days before everything changed. He spent them the way a boy spends summer days in the country, fishing, playing, riding around with his cousins, laughing. By all accounts, he was easy to be around. He told stories. He made people feel loose. On the afternoon of August 24th, he and a group of cousins and friends drove into Money to buy some things at the store. It was a Wednesday. The cotton gin fan was still turning in the heat. Nobody was thinking about anything in particular. What happened inside Bryant's grocery on the afternoon of August 24th, 1955, lasted no more than a few minutes, possibly less. Emmett went in to buy some bubble gum. Carolyn Bryant was behind the counter. The other boys waited outside or came in and out. At some point, Emmett and Carolyn Bryant were briefly alone in the store, a minute, maybe less. What passed between them in that minute is the question that has never been fully answered, and after 2023 can never be answered at all. What Carolyn Bryant said under oath in September 1955, that Emmett grabbed her hand and would not let go, that he grabbed her around the waist, that he made explicit sexual propositions to her, that he told her he had been with white women before. She testified to this in careful detail in a voice that the courtroom described as steady in front of an all-white jury in Tallahatchie County, Mississippi, with her husband and his half-brother sitting at the defense table. What witnesses outside the store said, they saw Emmett came out, and as Carolyn Bryant walked to her car, he whistled at her. A wolf whistle, some said. Others said it was just a sound, that Emmett had a stutter that he sometimes whistled, to get the words moving, that it was reflex more than intent. His cousin Simeon Wright, who was 12 years old and standing right there, said for the rest of his life that Emmett did nothing wrong. That what happened in that store was not what Carolyn Bryant said it was. What Carolyn Bryant said to Timothy Tyson in 2007, that part's not true. She also said something else according to Tyson's notes. She said nothing that boy did could ever justify what happened to him. I want to sit with that sentence for a moment, because it contains something important, not an exoneration, not a full accounting, but something. An acknowledgement that what happened to Emmett Till was unjustifiable, that she knew it, that she had known it perhaps for a very long time. And then she denied saying any of it. 3 days passed between the afternoon at the store and the knock on the door. Emmett spent those 3 days in the ordinary way. He visited with his cousins. He went to a church service with his Uncle Mose. He ate the meals that were put in front of him and slept in the bed that was made up for him in Mose Wright's small house on Darkfear Road outside Money, 3 miles from the store. He did not know that Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam were spending those same 3 days deciding what to do about him. At approximately 2 o'clock in the morning of August 28th, a truck pulled up to Mose Wright's house in the dark. Roy Bryant got out. He knocked on the door and identified himself. When Mose Wright opened it, Bryant said he wanted the boy who had done the talking at the store. Mose Wright was 64 years old. He had lived in Mississippi his whole life. He knew exactly what this was and exactly what it could become. His wife Elizabeth got out of bed and stood beside him in the doorway and asked the men to wait until morning, asked them to take the matter up with the boy's father in Chicago, asked them to spare the child. Bryant and Milam came inside anyway. They went to the bedroom where Emmett was sleeping. They told him to get up and get dressed and come with them. He was taken from the house at 2 in the morning in the dark in his underwear and put into the back of a pickup truck. 3 days later, 2 boys fishing in the Tallahatchie River found a body. It had been in the water long enough that Emmett's great-uncle could identify him only by an initialed ring on one finger. His face had been beaten beyond recognition. He had been shot above his right ear. Around his neck, attached with barbed wire, was a 75-pound cotton gin fan that Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam had taken from a barn in Drew, Mississippi. The barn where, according to later investigations, Emmett Till was actually killed, though that location would not be confirmed for 50 years. Mamie Till Bradley, when her son's body was returned to Chicago, made a decision. She requested an open casket at the funeral. She wanted the world to see what had been done. "Let the people see what they did to my boy," she said. Tens of thousands of people filed past that casket. Photographs of Emmett Till's body were published in Jet magazine and circulated across the country. Rosa Parks would later say that it was thinking of Emmett Till that gave her the strength to stay seated on that bus in Montgomery 3 months later. Martin Luther King invoked his name. James Baldwin wrote about him. The open casket became one of the defining images of the American Civil Rights Movement. In Money, Mississippi, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam were indicted for murder and brought to trial. The trial lasted 5 days in September 1955 in the Tallahatchie County Courthouse in Sumner. It was a warm week and the courtroom was packed. Black spectators in the gallery above. White spectators on the floor below. Journalists from across the country filling the press tables, photographers moving along the walls. The defendants sat at the defense table with their wives and their lawyers, and they did not appear particularly concerned. The prosecution's most important witness was Moses Wright. Moses Wright. Mose, as everyone called him, was 64 years old, a sharecropper and part-time preacher who had lived in the Mississippi Delta his entire life. He took the stand in a courtroom full of white faces in Tallahatchie County, Mississippi in 1955, and he pointed at Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam, and he said, "That is the man who came to my house. That is the man who took the boy." It was, according to people who were in that courtroom, a moment that stopped the room. Not because it was unexpected, everyone knew who had taken Emmett. Till everyone had always known, but because a black man in Mississippi in 1955 had stood up and said it out loud before a court of law. He had pointed his finger. He had named them. His wife had already fled the state. He had already been advised by people who knew what such a thing could cost, that he might not survive to see the verdict. He said it anyway. Carolyn Bryant also testified. The judge ruled that her testimony about what Emmett had done in the store was inadmissible. In front of the jury was deciding a murder charge, and what had happened in the store was not relevant to whether Bryant and Milam had committed murder. But she testified anyway in a session from which the jury was cleared, so the record would contain her words. She described again what she said Emmett had done. She was steady on the stand. She did not waver. On September 23, 1955, The all-white, all-male jury deliberated for 67 minutes and acquitted Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam of all charges. One juror said afterward that it would have gone faster if they hadn't stopped for a soda. Several jurors said in interviews conducted years later that they knew Bryant and Milam were guilty. They did not think white men should go to prison for killing a black boy. Mose Wright left Mississippi the night of the verdict and never returned. In January 1956, Look magazine published an article written by journalist William Bradford Huey. The article was titled "The Shocking Story of a Proved Killing in Mississippi." In it, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam described in their own words how they had abducted Emmett Till from his uncle's house, how they had driven him to a barn in Drew, how they had beaten him and shot him and weighted his body and thrown it in the river. They had sold the story for $4,000. They could afford to be candid. The double jeopardy clause of the United States Constitution meant they could never be tried again for the same crime. They were untouchable. Milam died in 1980. Bryant died in 1994. Neither was ever charged with anything else in connection with the murder. Carolyn Bryant did not participate in the Look article. She said nothing publicly. She divorced Roy Bryant eventually. Remarried, changed her name, moved between states. She became over the decades a difficult person to find. A private person by the accounts of those who encountered her in later life. A churchgoer, a grandmother, someone who, when the subject of 1955 came up, did not discuss it. Emmett Till's name was becoming in those same decades one of the most invoked names in American public life. His face was on murals. His case was cited in legislation. His mother spent the rest of her life, she died in 2003, speaking about what had happened to her son, advocating for civil rights, insisting that his death not be used without his personhood being honored alongside it. She did not want her son to be only an image of what had been done to him. She wanted people to know who he was. He liked to make people laugh. He was good at card games. He had a wide-open smile that his mother described in interview after interview in the particular way that mothers describe things they can no longer touch. Carolyn Bryant said nothing. In 2004, the Department of Justice, under pressure from civil rights organizations and following new investigative work by a filmmaker named Keith Beauchamp, reopened the Till murder case. Emmett's body was exhumed. An autopsy was performed. The investigation determined that at least 2 people beyond Bryant and Milam had likely been involved, possibly as many as 10 according to Beauchamp's research. None of them were ever charged. The statute of limitations on federal civil rights violations that existed in 1955 had long since expired. The case was closed in 2006. No charges. In 2007, Timothy Tyson went to North Carolina. He had been researching the case for years. He was writing a book about the cultural and political conditions that had made Emmett Till's murder possible, about the Mississippi governor's race that had been running the week before Emmett arrived in Money. A race in which candidates competed to be the most aggressive defender of segregation. A race that had supercharged the atmosphere of racial violence in the Delta. He wanted to talk to Carolyn Bryant Donham. He had been trying to reach her for a long time. Through her family and intermediaries, she agreed to meet him. They sat together and she talked. According to Tyson's account, she was reflective. She was not the woman from the 1955 trial. She was an old woman who had been carrying something for more than 50 years. At some point, Tyson raised her trial testimony, the part about Emmett grabbing her, propositioning her the physical contact she had described. She looked at him and said, That part's not true. And then nothing that boy did could ever justify what happened to him. Tyson was still setting up his recorder. He wrote the words in his notebook. The session continued. He does not appear to have pressed her on what she had just said, does not appear to have asked her why or when she had understood this, or whether she had ever considered saying it to someone who could do something with it. The interview ended. He drove home with his notes. He sat on those words for 10 years. He said later that he was uncertain how to use them, uncertain of their full context, uncertain whether publishing them would help or harm. In 2017, in his book, The Blood of Emmett Till, he disclosed them. The reaction was immediate. Civil rights organizations called for a new investigation. The DOJ reopened the case. FBI agents went to find Carolyn Bryant Donham, who was by then in her 80s living in a care facility. They asked her directly whether she had told Tyson that part of her testimony was not true. She said she had never said that. Tyson had no tape. He had his notes and his memory and nothing else. The DOJ could not prove she had recanted. In December 2021, the case was closed again. In June 2022, a family researcher found something in county records, an arrest warrant for Carolyn Bryant, signed in August 1955, the day after Emmett's body was found. A warrant that had existed for 67 years and had never been served because, according to the notation on the back, she could not be located at the time. Whether that was true or whether it was a courtesy extended to the wife of the men who would soon be acquitted, the record does not say. A grand jury was convened in Leflore County in August 2022. They heard 7 hours of testimony. They declined to indict. Carolyn Bryant Donham died on April 25, 2023. She was 88 years old. In the death notice, she was described as a beloved mother and grandmother. No cause of death was given publicly. No one has ever been held legally responsible for the murder of Emmett Till. I want to say something about Mamie Till Bradley because I think she is the person this story belongs to more than anyone else. She made a choice in August 1955 that required a kind of courage that is hard to fully understand from the outside. Her son's body came back to her so damaged that she had to identify it by a ring. She was advised by the funeral home and by people who loved her to have a closed casket, to let it be private, to spare herself and her family the public consumption of her grief. She refused. Let the people see what they did to my boy. She understood something that the legal system in Mississippi in 1955 did not and would not acknowledge, that the only court available to her was the court of public witness. That if the official systems, the police, the courts, the laws were not going to hold anyone accountable, then the only thing she could do was make sure the world could not look away. She opened the casket and she stood beside it for 4 days while tens of thousands of people filed past. And she watched them look at her son, and she believed that their looking would matter. She was right. It mattered enormously. It changed things in ways that took years to fully measure. And it cost her something that cannot be fully measured either: the private grief that becomes when you open the casket a public instrument. She spent the rest of her life in service of what her son's death had started. She spoke and organized and testified and demanded. She died in January 2003, 2 years before Emmett's body was exhumed for the federal investigation, before the arrest warrant was found, before Carolyn Bryant's 4 words were published. She did not live to hear that part's not true. I have thought about those 4 words for a long time, about what Carolyn Bryant Donham meant when she said them, if she said them, about what she expected to happen next. Did she think it would bring relief? Some version of absolution, not legal, not formal, but human. Did she think Tyson would receive them and do something gentle with them, fold them into a book as a historical footnote? Allow her to have said the thing without having to live in the consequences of saying it? Or did she not say them at all? Was Tyson's recollection an error or a distortion or something more complicated? Is it possible to sit across from a man who is writing about Emmett Till with all the weight of that name in the room, and have your words shift in the air between you into something you did not quite say? I don't know. I can't know. Nobody can now. What I know is this: Emmett Till was 14 years old. He had a stutter and a wide smile, and a mother who loved him with a precision and intensity that comes through in every account of her, in every interview she ever gave, in the way she stood beside the open casket and watched the world look at her boy. He went to Mississippi for a summer visit, and he went into a store to buy some bubble gum, and whatever happened in that store in that 1 minute in the heat of a Mississippi August, it was not enough. It was never enough. Nothing he could have done in that store or anywhere was enough to justify what Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam did to him in the dark before dawn on August 28th, 1955. Carolyn Bryant Donham understood that. She said so, if we believe Tyson. Nothing that boy did could ever justify what happened to him. She had understood it perhaps for a very long time. She carried that understanding for 68 years, and she went to her grave with it, and it did not in the end change anything that could be measured. A warrant was found in a file after 67 years. The grand jury looked at it and did not act. The cotton gin fan that was tied around Emmett's neck was recovered from the river in 1955. Nobody knows what became of it. Emmett's original casket, the one Mamie opened, the one that held her son, while tens of thousands of people filed past, was donated to the Smithsonian Institution in 2009, where it is on permanent display in the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington. You can go see it. It is in a room with other artifacts of the civil rights movement, things that were made or used or carried during those years when people were trying to get the country to see what it had always been. The casket is there behind a glass in the middle of it all. It is empty now, but it is not nothing. Mamie Till understood the difference. She opened it because she believed that witness the act of looking directly at something and refusing to turn away was the only power she had left. I think she was right. I think it is still sometimes the only power any of us have. To look, to not look away, to say this happened and it matters, and I am not going to let it become only a symbol. He was 14 years old. His name was Emmett Till.